Welcome back to the Boys in the Booth podcast, episode 222. And we are so glad to be with you for this one. Cody Abrams and Melbourne, all three of us back for this episode. And guys, let's get right into our Core 4 Stories segment to kick it off. And we have to start with Jim Montgomery. I mean, what a week it's been for Monty, hired by the St. Louis Blues. The big news that came out on Sunday, just 5 days after being let go by the Boston Bruins, and he gets a 5-year contract as well with St. Louis. So he returns to the Blues, where he was an assistant during their Stanley Cup run in 2019, I believe. So what a week for Jim Montgomery. Just an absolute roller coaster of a week for him, and we'll start there.
Well, the last time this happened, it worked out pretty well for the team that picked up the Boston Bruins head coach. Ended up in a Stanley Cup, if I do recall. It's amazing. I was talking about this the other day with someone, that how quickly it becomes the coach's problem. And in Boston in particular, where there's such a winning culture there, not even just the Boston Bruins, but Boston sports in general. So if you're having an off season, something's got to change. And it's always the coach right away. And right after we had that conversation, we talked about the Florida Panthers and how, everything's going so well for them, and all these different pieces of their game that's so good. And we ranted about them for like 20 minutes, didn't mention Paul Maurice once. So when you're doing well, you don't get talked about as a coach. And when your team's playing poorly, you get axed. And it's so funny to me. I'm sure he's going to, once that team has a bit of a retool, find some success in St. Louis. He's a good coach, and I don't think anyone's saying he's a bad coach in Boston. It's just, part of the job.
Yeah, totally. Part of the job, being the scapegoat when players need a different voice in the room. Like obviously in Boston, they've committed to that group of guys. They gave them a lot of money in the offseason, and you can't really make quick turnaround trades and start a rebuild here because you've promised so much to so many people in so many different ways. So the easiest thing to do, fire the coach. That's what they did, despite his incredible record with the team. Like, looking at some of those numbers, like I believe over his entire tenure, he only has about 40 regulation losses with the team. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think 9 of them came this season. So like, that's crazy. After bringing this team, coaching this team to have the absolute best single season points record, to being fired in such a quick turnaround, it's just crazy. It just shows how, thankless of a job it is to be a coach in the NHL. But talk about the St. Louis Blues. Bold move, firing their coach to hire this guy. Like, that's how sought after Montgomery was among teams in the NHL, where St. Louis thought that they had to go out and literally can their current guy just so that they could get a sniff at Montgomery, which is just kind of crazy. That John Kiriakou said that to me. Like, that doesn't happen very often. Usually coaches are internal hires, or it's an off-season thing based on the results of the season. But mid-season to fire your guy,
like you're rocking an interim head coach.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's crazy. And another thing too is, remember last time the St. Louis Blues fired a coach mid-season after not being in a very good position? It was Craig Berube who was their new hire, internally, mind you. So a bit of a different situation, but they won it all that year. So that's something to think about too. Not saying St. Louis is going to win it all this year, but just kind of interesting. So we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Surprising news. Did not expect to see that on a Sunday. And this is now the third coach that Don Sweeney has fired as the GM in Boston. So if you want to point the finger at anybody, I think he'd be a good place to start. So, all right, we'll move on to our second item here. Let's talk about Connor Bedard, guys. He's really struggling right now with a struggling Chicago Blackhawks team. They were up 2-0 in that game over the weekend against the Philadelphia Flyers. Ended up losing in overtime. Matvei Michkov got the game winner, but Bedard didn't have a shot on goal, and he is now goalless in his last 12 games. Who saw that coming from the young phenom in Chicago? So, How concerning is this?
To me, it's not. I wouldn't be too concerned. He's got so much talent, and like every time I see him on the ice, well, he stands out to me. Uh, this is just gonna happen when you slap duct tape on an issue that is a Chicago Blackhawks lineup, and try to make it so that these guys can levitate Connor Bedard's early career, but it's just not really working out right now. I mean, the biggest weapon, the guy who's been the biggest weapon for Connor Bedard so far is Nick Foligno, and like that's not what we expected at all. And yeah, I think you can maybe look at Taylor Hall as being a candidate for a later topic or a later conversation in this episode for our topic, but the team just is struggling, and I don't think that you can expect Connor Bedard to be the one that just totally right side that.
Yeah, the blame can't fall entirely on his shoulders for his lack of production. I mean, just look at the group around him. It's not very good. And, you might say, well, there was a lot of hype around this kid, similar to McDavid or Matthews, and look what they did in their first couple seasons. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not that easy, and you're not going to get a 100-point season out of a second-year player very often. McDavid is an outlier for a reason. There's a reason there was so much hype around him. There's a reason he has 1,000 points. Bedard, very, very good player, but I think we have to be careful in terms of putting players in McDavid's category too soon.
Nathan
because
McKinnon,
it's tough.
His first season, 63 points. His second season, 38 points in 64 games. So, I mean, a little bit of a sophomore slump is certainly possible, especially McKinnon. Those early teams were not good.
Yeah, and it's a tale as old as time, right? A young player comes into the league, shows some promise early on, and then has that sophomore slump. Like it happens every season, it seems.
Yep.
I don't know what the reason is. Maybe they get a bit complacent. I doubt that's the case. I think it's just, realizing that the moments get bigger and you're relied on more, and it's just tough to live up to that all the time. One thing I'll say about Bedard, too, is this league has become bigger and faster and stronger over the years. Like we've watched this league go from, an extremely tough and physical league to an extremely fast and skilled league. And now it's kind of going the other way. The pendulum is kind of swinging back to big, strong teams. So being a smaller guy, it's going to take him a little bit longer. Just, similar to a guy who is smaller in a different way, in a guy like Jack Hughes, who is incredibly talented. It took him a while. He was a little slighter in stature, but these guys are uber talented. They figure it out. Look at Jack Hughes now. So I'm not worried about Bedard. I don't think it's time to panic and put him on the wing permanently going forward, as some people are talking about, especially because the Blackhawks are just so thin down the middle. Like it just doesn't make sense. But I wouldn't say it's time to worry about Bedard. He'll figure it out. It's just a sophomore slump.
No, I agree.
Back in the day, sorry, Harp, just quick.
No, go
back
ahead.
in the day, you had to be big or skilled. That's all you needed. Now you need to be bred in a facility in a basement in Arizona, and you got to be big, strong, fast, and skilled.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, and certainly not panicking or worrying about Bedard either. He just doesn't have enough help around him. I mean, that's just the reality in Chicago. So we'll move on now to Sidney Crosby, who becomes the 21st player in NHL history to score 600 goals. And guys, again, like not to dump on the Penguins for, the 11,000th time or whatever, but, like it's such a shame. Like he gets that goal, is completely fired up and such a big moment. All the guys come out to congratulate him. And on that same night, they get pumped 6-1 by the Utah Hockey Club. Like, just that is really too bad. And I just feel for Sid, but this is an incredible accomplishment. And I guess it's a shame that, he's doing all of this while still on a terrible Penguins team. So, but nonetheless, team aside, their record, all of it aside, one of the greatest players ever with a huge accomplishment here.
Yeah, well, I've had firsthand account of a lot of those goals. I think the Devils, there's around 50 something goals he's scored on New Jersey. It's the third highest team share. So I've definitely seen Crosby score a few goals in my life, and it just seems so effortless for him sometimes. It's incredible, and he's going to continue to score goals for a few more years.
Yeah, like still playing at an incredibly high level. That's why it's such a shame that Pittsburgh is where they are, but that's a conversation for another day, which I'm sure we will have plenty of times as we watch this disaster go on in Pittsburgh. Even though Harp and I disagree, we're on opposite sides of this conversation here. But with Sid, it's incredible to see him score number 600. Not that it was ever in doubt that Sid would go to the Hockey Hall of Fame, but by all accounts, 600 is basically the lock to get into the Hall of Fame. I don't know if there's a single guy who has scored 600 who isn't in the Hall.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that's something we can look into, but I think 600 is probably the magic number. Not that he was going to have a problem anyways.
So you need 600 goals. It doesn't matter if you have like 2 Ted Lindsays, 2 Art Rosses, 2
Don't
Harts, 4 All-Stars, or
Couple
14
cups,
All-Stars,
like...
3 cups,
Yeah.
2 Conn Smythes.
I think he's
triple
safe,
gold club.
But 600, I think, puts him over the edge.
Yeah.
I can remember, like, in years past, going to a few Ottawa Senators games when Pittsburgh was in town, and telling whoever I was with, like, guys, we have to get there early because I want to see Crosby in the warm-up. Like, that was a big thing for me, and to watch him live, just in general, is pretty special. So, and I think we've all, or most of us, have had the opportunity to do that. So, truly a special accomplishment. And finally, guys, our fourth item here for Core 4 Stories. The Ottawa Senators, they are struggling right now. They've lost 5 in a row, and the November curse continues for this team. They are a very poor hockey team in the month of November, 3-7-1 this season in that month. And I actually have the numbers for the last 5 seasons for the Ottawa Senators in the month of November, courtesy of StatMuse. So this just gives you an idea of how bad the Senators are in November. Their record over the last 5 years, 154, 181, 16, and 25. So that just gives you an idea of the Sens' struggles in the second month of the season. And what can we say about this team right now? A team that, is supposed to be taking a step forward here. And once again, November is haunting them.
Yeah, it's tough times in Ottawa, and tough times to be an Ottawa fan. I hear the complaints a lot, and it's hard to watch November be the curse for them again. They're important points. We talk about the American Thanksgiving and kind of also just the mentality that you have for the rest of the year when you struggle in the second month of the season. It's just so damaging. I like to find some excuses for this team. Usually they have the crutch to lean on, that is injuries. They haven't really suffered too many, important injuries, which knock on wood for them. Hope that doesn't happen, but that's usually their excuse. No excuse right now. They're just not playing up to snuff. They're an incredibly streaky team, so they could turn things around really quick. And I guess the only positive you could take out of this is that the Atlantic door is wide open because no one wants to win hockey games in that division right now.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of the Atlantic case and the Senators here, like, as if November is the worst month for the Senators over the last 5 years, because it's the complete opposite for the Maple Leafs. Like, the Maple Leafs own November. So, if you ever want to see a playoff series between these two teams again, something's going to have to give. Either the Leafs are going to have to get worse in November, or Ottawa's going to have to get better, because at the rate they're going, it doesn't look good for playoffs.
I mean, how many times have the Leafs and the Sens played in November? There's got to be a statistical correlation in between those two records because they are in the same division, so they probably played a lot.
Yeah, that's true. But if they did play a lot during November, you'd think that the Sens, because they seem to own the Maple Leafs, because they play like it's Game 7 every time, their records will be different. But anyways, it's not looking very good for playoffs right now. And I just want to say to all the Ottawa Senators fans listening, not going to say it yet, but I'm getting very close to saying, I told you so. I'm getting very close. I'm not saying it yet, but I'm getting very, very close. And same with a guy like Elliot Friedman, who picked them to make the playoffs. It's like, listen, this team, sure, they look good on paper. They should have enough in net. They should have enough on the back end, especially if they add at the deadline if they're in a good position. They should have enough up front. They've got a good mix of young and old forwards who can contribute, but for whatever reason, they're starting to get everyone's hopes up every year, and then they crash and burn in this month, apparently. So I'm not going to say it yet, but I'm very close to saying I told you so.
It's just so rich coming from a guy whose fan base says they're going to win the cup every single year, and then they lose in the first round.
They finish top 5 in the league almost every year in the regular season. Listen, I know it's different in the playoffs, but you got to get there. Sens fans have been saying that they're going to get there for the last 3 years, 4 years.
I'm trying to remember exactly what I hear. Do I hear we're going to win the cup, it's our year? Or do I hear we're going to finish first in the Atlantic Division?
Well, that never happens either, because the Atlantic is very top heavy. But
yeah, fair.
Listen, regular season is different from playoffs. I'll admit that. All I got to say, though, is at least we get there. Okay, at least the Maple Leafs get there.
I've been at the Canadian Tire Center the last 2 Thursdays to see the Sens in action, and the Philadelphia game stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, I think the shots at one point were 26-4 for the Senators. Somehow they lose that game, and it came down to Allmark, who gave up 5 goals on 15 shots. They lost that game in overtime, and then the game this past Thursday against the Vegas Golden Knights. If they had played the way that they did in the third period for the entire game, they would have won that one. So I think the Senators tend to shoot themselves in the foot, fairly often, and that's why they're losing games.
Yeah, I will say Brady Tkachuk is currently ranked 3rd in our fantasy league, so keep doing what you're doing, Brady. He's been great. I picked him, I think, 7th or 8th overall in our league, and I'll take that. And also Allmark, you mentioned quick, has had a terrible start to the season. Same with Swayman in Boston. Well, so who knows about goaltending anymore? Nobody.
Allmark, Allmark doesn't have enough help in front of him, is my personal opinion.
But looking at the numbers, that's not true. That's not necessarily true. The Sens are actually not as bad defensively as we typically think they should be or would be, but it's just Allmark not being able to give saves. At least that's what Money Puck's advanced numbers are saying. I mean, we know that other teams have internal stats, and there might be some better stats than Money Puck, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We have the stats available to us. So he hasn't been good. It's simple as that, but that tandem should be enough. Those guys are both capable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was looking that way early on. Big win over the Leafs. They shut out Toronto in Toronto, and then it's wild how quickly it can flip. And all of a sudden you've lost 5 in a row, and your playoff chances are slipping once again in the second month of the season. All right, there we go, guys. That's Core 4 Stories for episode 222. And we'll move on to our main topic of the episode. And we're looking ahead quite a bit here to the 2025 UFA class in the NHL, which is always a fun topic. Guys looking to have big years, looking to get big contracts in the off season. So we're going to look at some guys who are currently thriving and are setting themselves up for a potential big payday, and guys who are fumbling the bag a little bit with their start to the season. So let's get into this here. Case, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I wanted to start us off on a positive note and talk about someone who's absolutely stealing the bag and going to just cost someone a lot of money here in the future. And that's Mikko Rantanen. He's on pace for 55 goals, 70 assists, 125 points. Those are all 3 career highs for him. Since entering the league, he's 7th in goals, 10th in points. That's unbelievable. I think about him the last few seasons scoring 100 points, and I know that he's elite. But when you look at since 2016, 2017, 7th in goals, 10 in points, that is just elite company. He's his on ice goal differential, expected goal differential is plus 20. That's 5th in the entire league on a team that is struggling to stay above 500 at the moment. When you look at the team and you think about how cap works and how it's always a discussion of percentage of cap. Well, this team is struggling to score outside of their top 4 guys, their top 3 guys, really. The 5th most points on the Colorado Avalanche currently is 12 points in 21 games for Girard. To put that in comparison to the Winnipeg Jets, 10th on their team in scoring has more points, 13 points. Colorado Avalanche, I think it's 6th or 7th guy has 7 points in 21 points or 21 games. No one is doing anything on this team except McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar, absolutely dragging them above 500 into the 4th in the Central.
Big boys.
So to me, Colorado has to be absolutely ready to just shell out millions and millions and millions of dollars, and Mikko Rantanen's giving them every reason to do so this season. The comparison I have, and I kind of feel like it's a very similar situation, is what happened in Edmonton. Connor McDavid signs his big contract, becomes the highest paid player in the league. And then 2 seasons later, Draisaitl, his number 2 man, his right-hand man, the number 2 guy in Edmonton, also a top 10, top 5 player in the league, similar to McKinnon and Rantanen. Draisaitl gets the bag. Highest paid player currently for next season.
Yeah.
And I just have to imagine that the same thing's going to happen in Colorado, where the timing works out perfectly for Mikko Rantanen and he gets more money than Nathan McKinnon. And I feel like that's going to happen, especially if the cap goes up to like 93, 95 million next year. It feels inevitable that Mikko Rantanen, with the current pace, what he's contributed, how he's performed the playoffs, has a cup. That's something that the top 4 guys getting paid can't say. I just have to imagine, other than McKinnon, of course, I just have to imagine that he's going to be getting at least 13 million on this pace.
Oh, higher, add a few zeros, could be in the billions. Like this guy is just hand over a blank check and let him write whatever number he wants, because they're going to have to pay him for all the reasons you said, all the contributions that he makes offensively for this team that no one else outside of the big boys is able to do. So yeah, he's going to get absolutely paid. Right now he's on pace for about 125 points, which would be a career high in a contract year. Shocker. That always happens for guys who are as dialed as Mikko Rantanen. Remarkably consistent player since entering the league. You mentioned that, what'd you say, he's 10th in points since entering the league?
Yeah,
something
7th
like
in goal and 10th in points.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable. And the cap, previously, Harp, when we were talking about the Kirill Kaprizov contract a couple episodes ago, the numbers at the time were projected to be about 92.5 million for next season when this Rantanen deal would be up. Since then, there have been discussions and leaks from Elliot Friedman and other sources saying that the cap could go high, like not 92.5 million, not 93 or 4, could be high, as high as 110 in the next 2 years. Yes,
wow.
That these are real numbers.
I heard 95 for next year, but I didn't hear the 110 thing.
I'm saying in 2 years could be as high as 110. These are real numbers that people are putting out there. So listen, if we're talking percentage of the cap, because I think going forward, especially with a cap that's going to be growing at such a fast pace, players are going to want to take advantage of this aspect of the comparable. If we're talking 15% cap, we're looking at a number over 14 million. And man, you might just have to give it to him. I know Draisaitl just got that big ticket at 14. I think Rantanen goes higher. I really do.
They're going to have to shuffle some things around, because I think at the moment they're only projected to have 14.7. So add a salary cap boost there, call it $17 million. They got to sign a few guys.
Yeah, give him 16.9. Play with 4 guys a night. Like he's going to get the money, absolutely earning the bag right now. He's stealing the bag and running away with it and never coming back. That's Mikko Rantanen right now.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. Consistent. That is
very consistent.
An underrated word for Mikko Rantanen.
Yeah.
No, and good comparison to Draisaitl and McDavid and in Edmonton. And by the way, Draisaitl gets that big ticket, and guess who's leading the National Hockey League in goals right now? Leon Draisaitl. So McKinnon is right in that class, and obviously he's got his running mate in McKinnon in Colorado, and yeah, this guy is going to get paid with a capital P. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch.
I just we always talk about the share, right? The percentage of how much cap a player gets. And whenever we're talking about these guys, we're talking about, Nylander or Marner or whoever, we're saying 13%, whatever. And you have to look at how many, like the goal share, the point share. I don't think anyone holds a torch currently to Mikko Rantanen and Nathan McKinnon, except for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So it's really a very similar situation where the better player signs the contract, and then the other guy 2 years later is just like licking his lips. But
yeah. And like, talk all you want about an internal salary cap or like setting the bar with your highest paid player and then everyone else falling in line. I think those days are gone. I really do. Like we saw it with Draisaitl. I think we're going to see a similar thing with Rantanen, as you're alluding to, because as the cap continues to go up, how can you justify that? Because these players, they bargain in terms of percentage of the cap. Now that's the new thing. And it just doesn't make sense to leave money on the table. And NHL players, like, they look around at other leagues and they want to be paid comparably with the cap going up. Yeah. Consider this. I mean, listen, the thing is with Rantanen, we thought he was going to get paid last time too. And he took a bit of a discount and then they won. So who knows what this player is going to get on his next deal, but market value anyway is extremely, extremely high. We interrupt this podcast to tell you about one of our favorite partners, Sign Up Expert. If you're a sports bettor, whether brand new, casual, or hardcore, listen very carefully because this ad is for you. Guys, line shopping for the best odds matters, and that's why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books to maximize their profits. Thankfully, there's never been a better time to get signed up, and we're here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. When you use our link at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth, you can get access to all the top sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Most importantly, all of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through our link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one, allowing you to start line shopping right away with an enhanced bankroll. Guys, it's simple. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful and profitable sports betting. So if you want to take advantage of these incredible benefits and support our brand at the same time, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook through the link in the description down below, signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. If you're planning on signing up for a new sportsbook anyways, you might as well use the link and support the boys. So one more time, that's signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is also sponsored by the absolute best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. SeatGeek does this awesome thing where they score each ticket out of 10 based on its value, so you know if you're getting a good or a bad deal. If the tickets are green, for example, you better act quick and secure those things because that's a good deal, but if the tickets are red, maybe wait a bit before pulling the trigger and monitor the price in the app. SeatGeek just makes it way too easy. Anyway, here's the best part though. SeatGeek has completely hooked us up. Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Chad?
Yeah, so should I go to a thriving player or a fumbling player, Harp? What do you think? I've got a few for each, but I don't know. Harp, what kind of player do you have, thriving or fumbling? Because I'll do the opposite.
I have a fumbling player.
Okay, I have a feeling I might know who you're going to take, so I'll pick a thriving player right now. And I have a list of a few guys here, players who are thriving. I'm only going to pick one, but before I do, a few honorable mentions. Mitch Marner is the obvious one. 26 points in 20 games, has really stepped up in the absence of Austin Matthews. John Tavares, similar thing. He's not an $11 million player anymore, but he's also clearly proving this year that he's not the $2 million player that some fans want him to sign long-term for. He's going to be somewhere in the middle, probably comparable to like a Kopitar deal. I think he signed 2 or 3 years times 7 million or something like that.
Yep.
So another player who's just kind of, solidifying his value and might take a bit of a discount, but yeah, that's JT. Rapid fire here. Matt Duchene having a great year. Nick Ehlers, Jack Roslovic, Kyle Palmieri turning back the clock. All those players are having great years in contract years. But the one I wanted to focus on is a player on the San Jose Sharks who might get dealt at the trade deadline and be a serviceable player for a playoff team because he's having a great season to start, and that's Mikael Granlund. 9 goals, 15 assists for 24 points in 23 games. He had 60 and 69 sneakily last year on the Sharks, which is, I didn't know that he was producing at this pace. He has a career high of 21 goals and 69 points, and he's on pace to smash that this year. So Mikael Granlund is a guy who's just been incredible so far, playing with some actual talent on the Sharks team, even though they're not very good at preventing goals. They can actually produce now because they have some weapons up front, and Granlund is taking advantage of that. I see him getting moved at the deadline, maybe slotting into, a lower in the lineup role on a better team, maybe a third line player or something, but, third line scoring threat. I would really like that if I'm a playoff team to acquire him. But yeah, right now, like he's just really making the case that he's not just, a complimentary player. He's a driving force on a line in the NHL, and he's making the case to make some big bucks. I don't know where the money will fall, but listen, if you have back-to-back years where you're 60 plus points and then say he gets, 70 plus this year, he could be looking at a solid contract.
And to be only a -4 on the San Jose Sharks, and when you're playing so much ice time wise there, that's impressive. But this is such a curious case, and I don't know where I would be in his camp right now. Like, do you want to get traded? I don't think I do, because
I agree.
you get traded, and then you're suddenly a third line, second line, middle six player. You get less opportunity to succeed. Your scoring goes down a bit, but maybe you contribute, and then you have less bargaining power when it comes to signing the next contract in the offseason when your rental's over. But you stick with the San Jose Sharks and score 75 points on the worst team in the league. You're like, hey, give me money. Look at what I'm doing. I'm absolutely carrying this team. So that's a really weird situation. I don't know how I would negotiate that if I was, his agent in the offseason, if he gets traded or not.
I know. And the comparables around the league are, it's kind of odd because his career has been so up and down in terms of his production over the years because, he had a couple good years in Minnesota where he scored his career high 69 points and his career high 26 goals. He had a couple good years in Nashville, but not all of them were great. At some points he was less than half a point per game. Went to Pittsburgh. That didn't work out at all. Had just 5 points in 21 games in 22-23. So I don't know. Like, this player's just been up and down for years. And, it's just interesting to see players in their contract year go off. Like, it's a tale as old as time, right?
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, there's money at the end of this rope here, and I'm getting close to the end. So, watch me, and then they go off. And that's what he's doing right now in San Jose.
Yeah, I love this one. This is a really good one, a really interesting one that's kind of been flying under the radar. San Jose is not very good, but they're getting better. A lot of young talent on that team, and that has been like their best line for a year and a half now. Eklund with Granlund in the middle, and then Fabian Zetterlund on the right side. So Granlund's been driving that line, and We know it was a disaster with him in Pittsburgh. Again, another move that was made under the Ron Hextall regime that just made no sense and didn't work out at all. And him going to San Jose has really revitalized his career. So I'm with Case. Like, if I was Granlund, I wouldn't want to leave. I look at I'd be looking at this this situation that he's in, being like, you know what? I've kind of turned my career around here, kind of turned back the clock a little bit. It's a young team on the rise, nice place to live. It's obviously worked out for me here. I better stay. So,
until July 1st. And then I'm like, get me out of here as fast as I can and sign the best contract I can get on a team that is not last place in the league.
Or you look at it like, comparable to a guy like Foligno in Chicago, and you go, hey, I'm looking around here. All your guys are young and not making a lot of money. You want a veteran presence? Pay me.
Yeah.
Pay me above market value. You want to keep me around? I just scored 75 points for you. You want to keep me around? Pay me, 6 times 4 years. Why not?
That's the contract that Tyler Toffoli got, by the way, in San
That's
Jose.
right.
So
that's right.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. I really like that one.
Player that he always, I don't know if it's the Minnesota connection or what it is, but I always associate him with Eric Haula. And I think that they're very similar players in the way they play. And I wonder what Eric Haula would do if he was on the first line in San Jose. Like, yeah. I think he could be a 60-point guy there, no problem. But he's just, sheltered in New Jersey playing third line all the time. Yeah. But he's good at that role. And now he's finally getting to stick around somewhere in New Jersey. So maybe it's a situation for Granlund. He doesn't want to move anymore. He's bounced around enough.
Yeah, definitely off to a great start. A couple guys that I did mention, I just wanted to say one extra thing. So Matt Duchene, having a great start. I don't know if you guys have seen his numbers, but 23 points in 19 games played. Just turning back the clock for him too. Of course, he was bought out, signs in Dallas, and has just been a perfect fit there.
Yep.
I think Nashville would love to have him back. Is that safe to say? They could use some scoring, no?
They could use a second-line center, or he'd be your first-line center on that team.
So it's so interesting what a couple years can do. And even when he was bought out, he didn't have a bad year. I think he had 56 points or something. I was looking at it earlier, but I don't know. It's just interesting what a couple years can do to a player's value. And that's just a curious one because he signed for $3 million. Before he was making $8 million. Surely his number now is going to be somewhere in between those two, but where exactly is that number going to fall? And is he going to price himself out of Dallas? I don't know what their cap situation looks like either. So it's kind of interesting, how players' values over time can fluctuate so much. And Duchene is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got some interesting decisions to make there. Jason Robertson is coming up again here sooner rather than later, and the list goes on. So
Jamie Benn is coming up.
Yeah,
that's a guy who is fumbling.
He's going to get a lot less, but I mean they've got a ton of guys that they need to sign. Luckily enough, they're sitting on $21.2 million next year. So
yeah, exactly.
Get creative.
All right. Well, you guys picked a couple of players who are thriving in their contract years this year. So I'll pick a guy who's fumbling the bag, so to speak. I'll be the negative one. All right. I'll do it. So I want to talk about a guy that, Case, you briefly mentioned earlier, who could be a guy that we talk about in this episode. Former number 1 overall pick. I think you know where I'm going with this. It's Taylor Hall of the Chicago Blackhawks. And Hall...
Didn't even mean to set that up for you, Hart, but here you go.
Hart Trophy winning Taylor Hall.
That's
by
right.
The way.
Yes. Yeah. Case, you didn't mean to set it up, but you did, and love you for it. And Hall, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points in 20 games, final year of that 4-year deal at $6 million AAV that he signed in Boston. And I don't think a lot of people were saying, when Chicago acquired him with Nick Foligno, at the time from Boston to add some veteran presence and help insulate Bedard. Like, I think we were all kind of on the same page that, oh my goodness, like, Hall gets to go to Chicago, be on the first line, be Bedard's running mate, and put up a bunch of points. And I just got thinking to myself, as I was looking at Hall's numbers and deciding to go with Taylor Hall for the subject of this episode, that this is the exact same thing that we heard when he signed with Buffalo, and it was going to be Taylor Hall and Jack Eichel as the two running mates on the top line. That didn't work out, and it's not working out here with the Chicago Blackhawks. And I think it's part of the reason why Bedard has struggled so mightily this season. And I mean, there are other guys too, like, Teravainen isn't producing, Bertuzzi isn't producing, like all these veterans that you've brought in, but Taylor Hall, like to have 6 points in 20 games, 2 goals, like we've seen this before, and he's on the wrong side of 30. Only played 10 games last season in Chicago due to an injury that kept him out for the rest of the season. So I was even thinking, like, coming into this year, okay, like Chicago has gotten better. They've added some veteran pieces here, a healthy Taylor Hall to play with Bedard. Like, he's going to be motivated to have a big year and then get himself a nice contract. And it just hasn't worked out at all. He's been a healthy scratch already this season by Luke Richardson. So, like, at this point, going into the summer, like, if you're a contending team who doesn't really have a lot of finances to spare, you could go to a guy like Taylor Hall and be like, hey, we'll give you $1 million and see what you can do for us. Or very similar to the deal that like Anthony Mantha got in the offseason with the Calgary Flames. And it's just such a shame that he is now out for the rest of the season. And he'll be going through this again, but got that 1 year, $3.5 million deal. And it's like, hey, come in, see what you can do for us. And then we'll try to find you a home on a contending team at the deadline. I think that's kind of what we're looking at with Taylor Hall now. He may just have to take what he can take at this point in the offseason. So, yeah, Taylor Hall, a guy who's fumbling the bag a bit for sure. And this was a great opportunity for him to, really provide a lot in Chicago and produce, and it just hasn't happened.
Yeah, Taylor Hall, the forgotten player. Like it's just been such a case of, Boston, the shuffle in Boston. And that's what makes this such a curious case to me. Taylor Hall, another good one to bring up, Harp. He was the guy in New Jersey, Hart winner, because he was the guy, absolutely carried a young team. So you'd imagine, hey, maybe that will happen again in Arizona. No. Maybe that'll happen in Buffalo. No. Goes to Boston, a competing team, gets absolutely lost in the shuffle, but puts up 61 points. Then goes back to another young team where he has to kind of try to carry, and it's not working out again. So really curious case. And your head went exactly where mine went, where I think the next contract is going to be for 1 year, very low, and he's got to prove himself. And it seems like the winning formula for him is to get on a competing team and be a middle six player, because it worked out in Boston, and that's how he's going to get his next paycheck. And I don't know, guy probably wants someone to cop. I'm surprised he went to Chicago in the first place.
Yeah, it is a very interesting case because, as you mentioned, he was the guy in New Jersey, and when he's been asked to be the guy going forward, he hasn't been able to live up to that. So it's weird. Like, some players we know, and goalies are the same way. Some goalies love to be a starter. Others are content and way better in terms of their numbers when they're a backup or in a tandem situation as opposed to being the starter. So it's obviously a similar case for Taylor Hall and other players around the league who, sometimes you just feel more comfortable if you're the fourth or fifth best player on the team as opposed to being asked to be the number one. And I don't know, there's probably some sports psychologists who could explain that better than we could, and we could spend hours on doing it, but we won't. It's just interesting because, like we said, he was the guy in New Jersey, so he's lived that role and he thrived in it.
There's been 3 teams that have tried to like recreate that magic with Taylor Hall, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of leaving money on the table here and fumbling the bag this season, I mean, it's evident. He has 6 points in 20 games, and he was a first overall pick. Like, he's not living up to expectations right now. But when he signed that 1-year deal in Buffalo, didn't he leave money on the table at that point? Wasn't there a long-term deal offered to him? Do you guys remember the context of that? I know there are certain cases, like John Klingberg is one who famously turned down, I believe it was an 8x8 in Dallas, looking to get more money, signed a short-term deal, and then obviously that's tough to leave that much money on the table.
Yeah,
but
that's
wasn't Hall in a similar situation?
Case, you could speak to that. Wasn't he offered a long-term deal in New Jersey?
I feel like I remember that, but it's been so long. Like, he went to Arizona, then he went to Buffalo, and it was a 2-year deal.
Was it? Yeah, I vaguely remember, but I feel like this is not the first time that he's left money on the table here, which is a shame because, you only get one career and you try to make as much money as you can. He was a first overall pick. He's obviously extremely talented. And listen, like, he could be a guy, we were talking about Matt Duchene earlier. He could be a guy like Matt Duchene who just gets kind of buried in a depth chart on a good team and thrives. Like, hell, if the Maple Leafs offer him a deal in the offseason for $1 million and say, hey, let's see what you can do, first overall pick, like, be a third line scoring forward for us, I'm sure he would thrive. So it's just, he's such an interesting player. And again, it kind of goes back to the Granlund conversation. Like, there aren't many comparables to a guy like Taylor Hall. Like, he's just kind of a unique in terms of how his career has unfolded.
Like, we talked about Colorado earlier and their cap situation and what that's going to look like in the near future, having to re-sign Rantanen, and then you've got Makar coming up in a few years. This is a guy they've been interested in before, I think, and I think he could be like a perfect fit on a contending team, a team that wants to win. In the Colorado Avalanche. Here you go. Here's $2 or $3 million. We're cash strapped right now. We need you to come in on a cheap deal and prove yourself and produce. And I look at a team like that for Taylor Hall.
Yes,
it's a no-brainer if I'm Taylor Hall, because look at what Ross Colton was doing on McKinnon and Rantanen's line before he was out. Like,
exactly,
he had like 8 goals in 10 games or something like that.
Yep.
Just put Taylor Hall on that line and he's going to be fine.
Yeah, Jonathan Drouin, another guy who was struggling a bit and comes to Colorado, and it's like, hey, look, he's back. Like, he's playing with his junior buddy. He's back. Like, this guy, so it works. That would be a perfect fit. If we're done on Taylor Hall, honorable mention here, I wanted to bring up just when I was looking through these, the UFA list for 2025, Andrei Kuzmenko, I think, is a player who's fumbling the bag a little bit in Calgary because he hasn't had a very good start to the season. He has 1 goal, just 1 goal, 8 assists, and 9 points in 21 games. But last season, after coming to Calgary, he was incredible. He had 25 points in 29 games, and Calgary thought that, they awoken, they is that how you say it? They awoken a beast? A beast was awoken. So they thought that they really unlocked something in Kuzmenko offensively when he came over from Vancouver in that deal, and he just hasn't been the same this season. So that's a guy I think is fumbling the bag a little bit, coming back down to earth.
Been hot lately, so I'm gonna tread carefully here, but what I said at the beginning of the season in the preseason rankings is that this team is going to have to change their identity of how they play. They've done that. It's been working for them for the most part.
Yeah. They've
been a lot more, chip in, bump and grind, win hockey games the hard way. And I said that that's not going to work for Kuzmenko. It hasn't worked for Kuzmenko. I also said it wouldn't work
under Rick Tocchet in Vancouver.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
I said that it wouldn't work for him and Huberdeau. And that's Huberdeau looked good early on. I mean, semi the case for him, really the case for Kuzmenko. So it's just not a system that's going to work for him. I think that it's not going to work.
Yeah, it'll work for guys like Blake Coleman and Nazem Kadri, but not Andrei Kuzmenko, evidently. And by the way, mentioning the Flames and Kadri, there are some talks returning to Toronto. Have to get that out there. That's what is being reported on the Real Kipper and Bourne show. I'm not making it up. So
George Parros and his cronies are licking their lips right now. How many games can we give him?
And his cronies.
Yeah, he can't wait till the postseason.
How many games, if he returns to Toronto, will he get suspended?
God.
You know how they have like NHL Edge and all these like new AI things to keep like here's the puck going around the ice. George Parros and his cronies just have Kadri highlighted at all times. They're like watching him like, was that a slash? Was that a slash? 4 games.
6 cameras on him at once.
Oh, that's good.
That'd be good. By the way, I'm listening to Kadri's book right now. He just put out a book, and it's on audiobook, and he recorded all of the lines, which, by the way, if you do an audiobook, if the author records it, it's just way better. Yeah. You hear how the author wanted the sentence to be read. So I'm listening to that right now. Kadri's amazing. I would love to have him back in Toronto. And I think most people would. And doing this book tour, he's been going on all of the Maple Leafs centered podcasts, and like the nostalgia is just getting drummed up here from this book and this tour. So that would be a match made in heaven. I doubt it happens, but one can dream, right?
Well, it's funny that, he did turn down a trade to Calgary. Like, Tree Living tried to acquire him, and he said no to that because he wanted to stay with the Maple Leafs, and then goes to Colorado, wins the Stanley Cup, ends up back in Calgary where he could have been traded, and he could find himself back in Toronto again under Brad Tree Living. So this
who else
become full circle.
You know who else is in Calgary to make this full circle as well? The guy he was traded for, Tyson Barrie, who is now like a PTO guy. So what a worst trade in Maple Leafs history. Kadri for Barrie and Kerfoot. Not good.
No, not good at all. All right, boys, I think that wraps it up for episode 222 with Core 4 stories and taking a look at guys who are in the 2025 UFA class in the NHL, currently thriving in their contract years, and guys who are fumbling the bag a little bit. So good discussion. Already, at the end of November pretty much here, which is absolutely wild, and got Christmas decorations up and all the craziness has begun. So we'll keep things rolling here. Thanks for joining us on this one, and we'll chat with you again next week.